All right, so today we're diving deep into cells, specifically how they maintain balance, like a constant juggling act, keeping everything running smoothly on the inside, even when the outside world is, changing. We're going to unpack the fascinating mechanisms that allow substances to move in and out of cells.
Yeah. It's like imagining a cell as a bustling city. It's got to, manage the flow of goods and people across its borders, right? Things need to come in: oxygen for energy, nutrients for building and repair, waste products have got to go out.
Like taking out the cellular trash.
Exactly.
Okay, so cells are like tiny cities managing their own import-export business. But how do they actually control what comes in and goes out?
That's where the cell membrane comes in. It's like the city walls acts as a gatekeeper.
Right.
And this gatekeeper is incredibly selective. It allows some things to pass through, blocks others. That selectivity is key to maintaining a stable internal environment for the cell, a concept called homeostasis.
Homeostasis sounds fancy. What's the big deal about it?
Well, it's essential for life. Think about it. Your body temperature stays relatively stable, right? Even when it's scorching hot outside or freezing cold, your body's working hard to maintain that internal balance. Cells are doing the same thing on a microscopic level. They need just the right temperature, pH, and concentration of various substances to function properly.
So it's like a Goldilocks situation for cells. Everything
Yeah,
needs to be just right.
exactly. And the cell membrane is the key to achieving that just right state. Let's look at figure 1.30 in our source material here. You see how the Thompson and Fraser rivers maintain their own distinct environments even where they meet the ocean.
Mhm.
Cells are similar. They need to maintain an internal environment that's different from their surroundings.
Okay, I'm starting to see how crucial the cell membrane is. But how do molecules actually cross this border? Do they just waltz in and out as they please?
Not quite. Some molecules can sneak through, but most need specific mechanisms to help them across. Let's start with the simplest one: diffusion.
Diffusion, didn't we learn about that in
Right.
chemistry?
You did. It's the natural movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Remember the mini lab experiment where you dropped food coloring into water?
Yeah, the colors spread out until the water was evenly colored.
That's diffusion. The dye molecules spread out randomly until they were evenly distributed. Cells use the same principle for transporting small molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide.
So oxygen just flows into the cell from the bloodstream where it's more concentrated. And carbon dioxide flows out because it's building up inside the cell as a waste product. It's pretty neat.
It is. But here's where it gets interesting. Diffusion works great over short distances, but is terribly inefficient over long distances. Imagine our giant amoeba friend from figure 1.32. If it were too large, it would take weeks for oxygen to reach the center of the cell by diffusion alone.
So size does matter for cells.
Mm.
That's probably why they stay so tiny. They need to keep things moving quickly. But what about water? How does it get across the membrane?
Water is a special case. Its movement across a membrane is called osmosis, and it's driven by the difference in water concentration, not the concentration of the things dissolved in it.
Hold on. I'm a bit confused. Doesn't water just follow whatever's dissolved in it?
Not always. Imagine two areas separated by a membrane. One side has pure water. The other has water with lots of salt dissolved in it. Where is the concentration of water molecules higher?
I guess it would be higher in the pure water, since there's nothing else taking up space.
Exactly. So water will move from the area of high water concentration, the pure water side, to the area of low water concentration, the salty water side, to try and even things out.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does this apply to cells?
Look at figure 1.33. It shows a red blood cell placed in pure water. Water rushes into the cell because the water concentration is lower inside. This causes the cell to swell up, and if too much water rushes in, it can even cause the cell to burst.
Wow, that's dramatic. So maintaining the right water balance is crucial for cells. But we've only talked about small molecules like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water.
Yeah.
What about larger molecules that are essential for the cell?
That's where things get even more fascinating. The cell membrane isn't just a simple wall. It's a selectively permeable barrier, meaning it chooses what can pass through. And for larger molecules, it has special transport proteins that act like gatekeepers and facilitators.
Ooh, transport proteins.
Mm.
Tell me more.
Think of them as specialized revolving doors embedded in the membrane. Each type of transport protein is designed to bind to a specific molecule and help it cross the membrane. Figure 1.34 shows how a carrier protein helps glucose, a sugar vital for energy, enter the cell. Glucose is too large to simply diffuse through the membrane, so the carrier protein provides a passageway.
So it's like a custom-fit door for glucose. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But is this still considered passive transport like diffusion?
Yes, it is. We call this facilitated diffusion. Even though a protein is involved, the movement of glucose is still driven by the concentration gradient, from high concentration outside the cell to low concentration inside. No extra energy from the cell is needed.
Okay, I'm following so far. But what happens when a cell needs to move something against its concentration gradient? From low to high. That seems like it would take some effort.
You're absolutely right, and that's where active transport comes into play. Think of it like riding a bike uphill. It requires energy to go against the natural flow.
And cells have tiny bikes. That's adorable. But seriously, how do they manage to do this?
They have something even better than bikes: cellular pumps. These amazing proteins use energy to move molecules against their concentration gradient, just like pumping water uphill.
Cellular pumps, they sound like tiny weightlifters, pushing molecules around where they don't want to go. But why would a cell need to do that? Seems kind of counterintuitive.
Well, it's all about maintaining the right balance of ions for crucial functions like, nerve and muscle activity. Take the sodium-potassium pump, for instance. It works tirelessly to move sodium out of the cell and potassium in, even though there's already more sodium outside and more potassium inside.
So it's constantly working against the natural flow. That must take a ton of energy.
You bet. And this pump is a prime example of why your cells are constantly working and burning energy, even when you're just relaxing on the couch. Figure 1.38 in our source material shows just how busy this little pump is.
Wow. So even when I'm feeling lazy, my cells are working out like crazy. But tell me more about these pumps. Like, how do they actually work?
It's a bit like those revolving doors we talked about, but instead of just facilitating movement, these pumps actually use energy to push molecules against their concentration gradient. It's like swimming upstream. It takes effort.
So these pumps are the real MVPs of the cell membrane, keeping things in order, even when it's a tough job. But wait, our source material mentioned something about using the sodium gradient to bring other molecules into the cell. It's like a clever energy-saving trick, right?
Exactly. Think of it like this. The cell has already spent energy pumping sodium ions out, creating a kind of downhill slope for sodium to flow back in. And just like a skill going downhill can pull someone else along, that inward flow of sodium can power the movement of other molecules against their concentration gradient.
So it's like a two-for-one deal. The cell gets rid of sodium and brings in something else it needs at the same time.
Precisely. This is how cells efficiently import essential nutrients like glucose and amino acids. They can't rely on simple diffusion alone to get enough of these vital building blocks.
Like a clever barter system. I'll let you back in, Mr. Sodium, if you bring along this glucose molecule I need. It's fascinating how cells have evolved these intricate mechanisms to manage their internal environment.
It truly is. And remember, this active transport system isn't just about moving molecules around. It's about creating the right conditions for all the complex processes that keep the cell alive and functioning.
Okay, so we've covered diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion, and active transport. It's like a comprehensive transportation system for the cell with different mechanisms working together to keep everything running smoothly.
That's an excellent way to put it. But just like any complex system, it requires a lot of energy to maintain. Remember that figure we saw earlier, the one with the cyclist struggling uphill?
Yeah, I'm starting to see that uphill battle in a whole new light now.
Active transport is a major energy drain for cells. In fact, when you're at rest, up to 40% of your cell's energy goes towards powering this essential process. And certain cells, like those in our kidneys that filter our blood, use even more energy for active transport, up to 90%.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of our energy budget. So even when we're lounging on the couch, our cells are basically running a marathon, pumping ions and transporting molecules nonstop.
Exactly. It's a reminder that there's a constant flurry of activity happening beneath the surface, keeping us alive and functioning. It's a microscopic world of intricate mechanisms and delicate balances.
Speaking of beneath the surface, let's go back to that question about viruses. If our cells are so good at regulating what goes in and out, how do those sneaky viruses manage to infiltrate?
Viruses. The ultimate gatecrashers. They're essentially tiny packages of genetic material. And they can't replicate on their own, so they need to hijack a host cell's machinery to make copies of themselves.
So they're like microscopic pirates invading and taking over our cells.
Yeah.
But how do they get past the cell's defenses? It seems like they'd be stopped at the border.
Viruses have evolved some pretty sneaky strategies to trick our cells. Some viruses have surface proteins that mimic those found on harmless molecules, allowing them to bind to receptors on the cell membrane and gain entry.
So they're like spies with forged passports.
Precisely. Other viruses can fuse their own membrane with the cell membrane, effectively injecting their genetic material into the cell's cytoplasm.
It's like a microscopic Trojan horse, sneaking its dangerous cargo past the guards. Our cells have these elaborate systems to keep things in balance, and viruses have figured out ways to exploit those very systems to their advantage. Pretty devious, if you ask me.
Indeed. It's a constant arms race between our cells and these microscopic invaders. Our immune systems have evolved ways to recognize and fight off viruses, but viruses are constantly mutating and adapting, trying to stay one step ahead.
It's like a never-ending battle, playing out on a microscopic battlefield inside our bodies. This is all pretty mind-blowing. But we've been talking a lot about animal cells. Are plant cells any different when it comes to transporting molecules?
That's a great question. While the basic principles of diffusion, osmosis, and active transport apply to both plant and animal cells, there are some key differences. Plant cells have an additional layer of protection, a rigid cell wall surrounding the cell membrane. This wall provides structural support and affects how water moves in and out.
So it's like an extra layer of security for plant cells.
You could say that. This cell wall helps the plant maintain its shape and prevents it from bursting in certain conditions. Remember what happened to the red blood cell when it was placed in pure water?
Yeah, it swelled up like a balloon and could have burst.
Right. That's because the water concentration was higher outside the cell, and water rushed in to try and balance things out. We call this a hypotonic environment.
Hypotonic, so that means lower solute concentration outside the cell compared to inside.
Exactly. And plant cells, thanks to their sturdy cell walls, can handle hypertonic conditions without bursting. In fact, they thrive in such environments because the inward flow of water helps maintain their turgidity, giving them that firm and upright structure.
So that's why plants wilt when they don't get enough water. They lose that internal pressure and become all droopy. It's like their cells are deflating.
Precisely. Water movement is crucial for plant cells to maintain their shape and function. And to help with that, plant cells have these special channels called aquaporins that facilitate the rapid transport of water across the cell membrane.
Aquaporins. So they're like express lanes for water molecules.
Exactly. These channels allow water to move much faster than it would through simple diffusion, which is essential for plants that need to transport large volumes of water from their roots to their leaves.
Wow. It seems like plant cells have their own unique set of challenges and adaptations when it comes to transporting molecules. It's fascinating how diverse life is, even at the cellular level.
Absolutely. And whether we're talking about animal cells or plant cells, the movement of molecules across membranes is fundamental to life. It's a world of intricate mechanisms, delicate balances, and constant adaptation, all working together to keep cells functioning and organisms thriving.
Welcome back to our cellular adventure. We've been exploring how cells regulate the movement of molecules across their membranes, and gosh, it's been quite a journey. But there's still so much more to uncover, right?
Yeah, we've talked about the general principles of diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, but now it's time to really zoom in on those specialized transport proteins we keep mentioning. Remember those gatekeepers and facilitators embedded in the cell membrane.
Right. The VIP bouncers and delivery drivers.
Exactly.
We learned how carrier proteins help larger molecules like glucose cross the membrane, but are there other types of transport proteins? I'm picturing like a whole team of specialized workers at the border.
That's a great analogy. Besides carrier proteins, which bind to specific molecules and change shape to move them across, there are also channel proteins. These act like tunnels through the membrane, allowing certain ions to pass through based on their size and charge.
So it's like having different lanes on a highway, some for cars, some for trucks. Each lane is specifically designed for a certain type of vehicle.
Exactly. Channel proteins are incredibly selective, only allowing specific ions to pass through their designated tunnel. Figure 1.35 in our source material illustrates this concept beautifully. For example, some channel proteins only allow, positively charged ions through, while others are specific for negatively charged ions.
So it's not just about size, it's about having the right the right credentials to get through. It's like having a VIP pass for those special ions.
Precisely. And these channel proteins play a crucial role in maintaining the proper balance of ions inside and outside the cell, which is vital for a wide range of cellular processes, including nerve impulse transmission.
Okay, nerve impulses, that sounds pretty important. How do transport proteins fit into that? It seems like a completely different world from moving glucose around.
Well, remember when we talked about the sodium-potassium pump and how it creates an electrochemical gradient across the cell membrane?
Yeah, the higher concentration of positive ions outside the cell creates a kind of electrical potential, like a tiny battery just waiting to be discharged.
Exactly. And when a nerve impulse travels along a neuron, it triggers the opening and closing of specific ion channels, causing rapid changes in that membrane potential. It's like flipping a switch, causing a surge of electrical activity.
So it's like a domino effect. With each channel opening, it triggers the next one down the line.
Precisely. And those rapid changes in membrane potential, orchestrated by the coordinated action of ion channels, are what allow us to think, feel, and move. It's incredible to think that these tiny transport proteins play such a crucial role in our everyday experiences.
Wow, those tiny proteins are involved in some pretty big things,
Yeah.
from transporting essential molecules to enabling our brains to function. It's amazing how something so small can have such a huge impact on our bodies.
It really highlights the interconnectedness and complexity of life at the cellular level. But remember, we've mostly been focusing on how individual cells transport molecules. What about multicellular organisms like us? How do they manage the movement of substances across different tissues and organs?
That's a great question. I imagine it gets even more complex when you're dealing with trillions of cells working together in a coordinated fashion.
Absolutely. Multicellular organisms have developed specialized systems for transporting substances over, long distances, like the circulatory system in animals and the vascular system in plants.
Right, I remember learning about those in basic biology. The circulatory system uses blood to carry oxygen, nutrients, and other vital substances throughout the body. And the vascular system in plants uses, xylem and phloem to transport water and sugars from roots to leaves.
Exactly. And even these large-scale systems rely on the same fundamental principles of diffusion, osmosis, and active transport that we've been discussing. For example, oxygen diffuses from the lungs into the blood and then from the blood into individual cells.
So it's like a relay race with different transport mechanisms passing the baton to ensure that substances get where they need to go. Each step is crucial for the overall success of the race.
That's a fantastic way to think about it. It's a beautiful example of coordination and cooperation at multiple levels, from individual cells to entire organ systems, all working together to ensure the survival and thriving of a complex organism.
Yeah, it really highlights the interconnectedness of everything in our bodies. It's amazing how these microscopic processes ultimately impact our overall health and well-being. But before we get lost in the vastness of biological systems, let's bring it back to the cell membrane and those remarkable transport proteins. Is there anything else we should know about them? Any fun facts or surprises?
Well, one important thing to remember is that the function of transport proteins can be affected by various factors, including temperature, pH, and the presence of certain molecules. This makes them highly responsive to the cell's, ever-changing environment.
So it's not just a free-for-all at the membrane. There's tight regulation of what goes in and out depending on the cell's needs and the surrounding environment.
Absolutely. Cells are incredibly dynamic and responsive to their surroundings, constantly adjusting their transport processes to maintain that delicate internal balance we've been discussing. It's like a finely tuned orchestra with different instruments playing their parts harmoniously to create a beautiful symphony of life.
What a fantastic analogy. It really captures the complexity and wonder of these microscopic processes.
It's a testament to the power of understanding these fundamental processes at the cellular level. It's the foundation for comprehending how life works, from the smallest microbes to the most complex organisms, including us.
Well said. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the basic principles of molecular movement, the intricate world of transport proteins, and even the unique challenges faced by plant cells. And we've seen how these microscopic processes play out in larger biological systems, ultimately contributing to the incredible complexity of life.
It's been a fascinating journey through the bustling city of the cell, exploring the highways and byways of its transportation system. We even encountered those sneaky microscopic pirates, the viruses, trying to to breach the cell's defenses.
It's amazing how much is happening beneath the surface all the time. I feel like I have a newfound appreciation for the complexity and beauty of life at the cellular level.
And remember, this is just the beginning of your exploration. There's still so much more to discover about the fascinating world of cells and how they make life possible. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep marveling at the wonders of biology.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of cellular transport. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way. Until next time, keep those brain cells buzzing.